There we go. So I'm on an AWS machine at the moment. I have absolutely no security between myself and the outside world on this AWS machine. There is nothing in the way between me and the internet. And that is quite common these days for home workers, because in the old world, you would have an on-premise network. And this on-premise network usually have a whole host of security appliances sitting on the network edge. These would range from antivirus, we've got the secure web gateway mentioned, maybe DLP, you would have firewalls, intrusion prevention, etc. And you'd have all your traffic going through these appliances. So these big 1U, 2U appliances sitting in full racks and data centers with all web traffic passing through them. And that was your point of control. So if I was to come into an office like that with that type of security, I would usually log on to a desktop or hook my laptop up to the network. And once I was on that network, all my traffic now passes through these appliances. So if I was trying to go to, say, a website I shouldn't be going to, my traffic goes through the secure web gateway. It is checked against any kind of access list, category list, etc. And if I'm allowed to go to it, the page loads. If I'm not, I get a block and probably a warning saying you're not allowed to be doing this. Raise an alert with IT if you think that's wrong, etc. So what happens when I go home and I'm using a laptop? And this was quite common during COVID. I've had it happen before with a previous employer where I'm sitting at home on my laptop and I have got zero security on my actual laptop. I can go where I want, I can download what I want, but the minute that I connect up to a VPN in order to access resources inside of that perimeter, that company perimeter, suddenly I've got all this security. Suddenly I can't go to certain forums that I use for tech, etc. Once I come off the VPN, I can do what I want. So are you actually secure when you've got a setup like that? And with the frequency of home working due to COVID, it's become such a huge thing that people aren't protected when they're outside of the office using machines. I mean, as an example, if I was to go onto a dodgy website and download malware and it wasn't getting checked properly and stopped at source and so on, because I'm not connected up to the company network, and then I connect to the company network, you've got that chance of propagation now, because I'm already past, the malware is already past the first line of defense, which is my machine and me. But because I did it outside of the office, no one knew because I wasn't on that company network. Now, there is a term for that. When you connect into an office and back out the way through those appliances via VPN, for example, it's called hairpinning. So think of the shape of a hairpin. You're going in, you're going back out. You're essentially looping back out of the company in order to go through that security. So the way that Netskope does this is we're using a cloud tenant, and all of the compute and all of the analysis of my web traffic is actually done in the cloud. So it doesn't matter where I am in the world. I could be in a hotel, I could be in an airport, I could be at home. If my machine is able to reach the internet, then it can reach the Netskope tenant. And therefore, I steer my traffic to the tenant and all of it's checked in the cloud. I'm no longer having to go into the office and back out via all these racks of appliances. It's being checked in the cloud in real time. Now, on screen at the moment, if you look at the bottom right, I've got a little icon here. This is the Netskope client. So it's a very lightweight steering facility. It's not doing any analysis at all of traffic and so on. It's just choosing what to steer up to that tenant. And it's completely granular. So say, for example, you wanted to send all traffic except for any kind of financial traffic. Financial traffic wasn't to go near the Netskope tenant at all due to some kind of privacy concern, some kind of compliance rule, etc. Then you create a rule inside of your tenant to say, don't send financial traffic to me. I don't want to see it. And this little client will now say, okay, if I see financial traffic, if it's badged as financial, I'm not going to send it to that tenant. So it's completely granular in that way. At the moment, I'm using the default config. So the majority, about 99% of my traffic from this machine will be going up to that cloud tenant. So if we start with a secure web gateway, how did they work? Well, they still work because many people still use them. And Netskope, at its heart, has secure web gateway as a feature. they're based upon domains. So if I go to a gambling site, you can see in my address bar here, it's sports.ladbrokes.com. So if you wanted to stop me going to a gambling site, you would stop me going based on the domain. So you would maybe wildcard it. So instead of sports.ladbrokes.com, it would be a star.ladbrokes.com. So if I go to any ladbrokes.com site with any prefix on it, I would be blocked. Now, you're not going to go around manually and find every single gambling site there is in the world and write down the domains for all of them and configure your secure web gateway in order to block gambling sites. So you block them based upon categories. So inside of a secure web gateway, there will be some kind of index of categories, and ladbrokes.com will exist in the gambling category. So if you want to block gambling for your users, you're going to block the gambling category, and any website that that machine is aware of as being a gambling site within that category will now be blocked. And it's a hard and fast block. You can either visit it or you can't. It essentially becomes like a firewall in that instance, where if you think of a firewall, how it works, you've got a source, you've got a destination, you've got some kind of access list or permission list for who the rule applies to, then you've got an activity which will be either block or allow. Some kind of exception or hard and fast block for that traffic on that particular connection. Now you can get a bit granular where you're now blocking on ports and so on, but in Netskope we can get more granular as well, which we'll come to. But at its heart, a secure web gateway is going to block based upon a category, and those categories are going to be populated with domains. And if you want to granularly configure your categories and so on, and we'll go for a use case in just a moment, you need to start looking at creating exception lists. So you could block an entire category, but then allow certain categories for your users to visit. So if I'm looking at this at the moment, I've got sports.ladbrokes.com. I can go to williamhill.com, another gambling site. What happens if I mask my domain? So I'm now visiting 888.com, which is a gambling site, but I'm actually doing it via translate.google.com. Some secure web gateways still to this day cannot handle that, because all they're just looking at the start of the domain. They're not looking at all of this at the end. They're not checking everything. They're largely looking at the domain right here. So if I go to translate.google.com and have it translate a website, this was one of the earliest massive kind of bypasses for web traffic that happened within offices, as you just went to a site like this. There are tons of these proxies now that you can visit, that you just launch the URL into a browser and it masks what you're doing. Not all of them can be captured by secure web gateways. Even Netskope can't spot some of them, but you can block proxies as a category in the same idea. So you block all proxies. We wouldn't block translate.google.com in Netskope because it's content aware. It would know, and I'll show it in just a moment, it will know what you're visiting, even though you're launching it inside of what is essentially a proxy, like the translate.google.com. So if we start with the tenant, and I'll just open up a brand new window for this. First thing about the tenant, this is actually Okta that you're looking at, and that's because in this world, if you imagine that perimeter that we talked about, where to get onto your company network, I would have to come into an office, I would have to get past front desk security, probably card readers, little fobs on doors, etc. Then I would have to get onto a machine using a username and password. The machine would have to be in the main join, so there's machine checking going on. I'm going through all these security tools, etc. And I'm inside this perimeter. I'm inside this bubble, so I'm trusted once I get to that stage. These days, it's all public-facing cloud portals. So if you imagine, if I go to Office 365, all I really need is a username and password. I mean, you can see which companies use certain things these days. If I go to Office 365 and I go to the login page, if I just put a fake domain into here, like for a company, if I hit sign in and like type in like ibm.com as the suffix of a fake email, I will be taken to the organization sign-in page. If IBM use Office 365, you'll be taken straight to the landing site for a company. if you sign in with the company address on most of these cloud-facing web portals. So if you're only using a username and password for security into these things, you definitely want to have some MFA. And Netskope's no different. It is a cloud-facing, a public-facing cloud portal. So therefore, you want to get some MFA on the front of it, and that's what this is. So this isn't the login screen for Netskope. This is a login screen for Okta. We're controlling all of the users via centralized user management, and we've got MFA as well. I will just quickly log into this. I need to get my Google Authenticator, which is my MFA for this. I'll just do 2 ticks. I don't mind you seeing this, it's going to change. And there we go. So this is me into the tenant. Now, there's one thing about the Netskope tenant, and that is it's been designed from the ground up in order to do its job. When you look at other tools that are CASBs or secure web gateways and so on, they can be Frankenstein products, which is where they used to be appliances sitting in a data center somewhere. You would buy the box, you would install it into a data center, and they've just essentially moved that software up into the cloud. So you're still logging into the same user experience as you would have got when you were using it on premise, which isn't necessarily always a bad thing, but it's dated. Then you've got this, companies acquire other companies and mash their products into their own. There's one main proponent of that that's been in operation for decades, that it's quite known that a number of their products are just mashups of other things, and they can be quite complicated to configure because under the hood you've still got these different technologies talking to each other, even though you're using one page like this. With Netskope, designed from the ground up, really intuitive, really easy to work out. Everything we're going to do today is going to be in real time. It's going to take me like a minute to do a policy, etc. And I really like it. So I'm just going to go into policies here, and we're just going to quickly take a look at our first policy. So here we've got a choice. I'm going to choose web access for our first policy, and we're going to block gambling. So we're going to stop all these gambling sites from working straight off the bat. So I can choose cloud app, I can choose private app, etc. We've got a range of things, a range of features here inside of this tenant, but we're focusing on the website and the cloud app side today. So we're not going to go into detail at the bottom here. Might touch on them later, but for now it's just web. Here at the top, I've got my source. So this can be single users, it can be groups. I'm pulling users in from Active Directory, which would be a kind of on-premise thinking way of populating users into your tenant. Very easy to do. You get a little application that sits on-premise on a trusted server that's got a connection to the tenant, and it just pushes up config from AD that you specify, pushes up like their full name, their username, their UPN, etc. to identify the user. If you look at my client here, you can see it's badged against a user. I can get the config back up. So here's my username here. It knows who I am that's on this machine right now that's generating this traffic. And that's the two things you need. You need the traffic, you need to identify it against one of your users. So we can also pull in users from Okta. That's what these workshop ones are. I've got an application in Okta. I put users into that application. They appear in Netskope. They're automatically pushed into the actual tenant. Now I can split down things by groups. I can split down things by organizational unit. I can get extremely granular to where I say it was the CEO of the company wanted a specific permission. I can do that. I can give the CEO that specific permission. Or if I had to do it for an entire marketing team, I could do it if they've got a group that I can associate them with. But for me, I'm just going to do it against a single user. I just need to change back here. And we'll do it against this user here. The category is what we discussed before. Again, here I can change it to cloud app and so on. In fact, actually, what we'll touch upon, I mentioned granular before. I've chosen this against the user. I can now get really granular as to how to identify that user is using a, for example, managed device, like I'm using either a company device. If I was to log in and I've got a Netskope client on a non-company device, so think of a contractor. If a contractor was to come on site, you're going to allow them to use your network, but only if you can install a Netskope client on their machine. So all of your users are using company machines, but this user is using their own machine, but you're trusting them to use your network. Then you could be specifying in here that if it's not one of our machines, use these stricter rules. So if you see this user and they're coming from a company machine, it's fine, we trust these certain things, but if they're not coming from a company machine, use these more strict rules, these stricter policies if they don't meet this criteria and so on. But one of the main things that people use this for is the browser. So Internet Explorer is obviously risky these days. Nobody wants to be using Internet Explorer. Some companies are dead against using Chrome, depending on the industry. Some companies use Edge, etc. You could be specifying here, block all traffic on my network if someone's using Internet Explorer. Or allow this connection only if they're using Chrome, where we could go into the browser here and you can see that I can choose any type of browser that's available inside of the tenant. But we're not going to do that today. So under categories, there are hundreds of them. So there's 132 here. There's probably about 3 custom ones that I've made. So out of the box, you're getting probably about 129 categories. They're all pretty straightforward. I mean, you can read these off, adult content, etc. You've got your main things that people will block from an inappropriate usage point of view. And then you've got your categories that will be risky. So for example, one of the main risky things that I'm constantly dealing with in Netskope is uncategorized websites, where you don't want people going to uncategorized websites because they're probably brand new. I could go to Azure right now. It would take me about 5 minutes using a wizard to set up a website in Azure. I could make that look like an Office 365 login page. I could be sending out emails trying to get people to log into it, to phish them, etc. But it's not going to be categorized. It's so brand new, it's not going to be categorized. Therefore, I want to block all uncategorized, sorry. But then I'll get companies that have maybe got a back-end web portal that's used for a VPN. So the company has their whole front-end web where their shop is, etc., and all their goods are sold through. That's all properly categorized. But a VPN that's on the back end probably isn't categorized. So therefore, I've got users trying to use that and they can't get into it because I'm blocking all uncategorized. And that's when you move into creating your exceptions and working that out. And it's relatively straightforward to do. So if I look down through here, we've got tons of categories. I can also, if I know what I'm looking for, type it in. There we go, gambling. Now, here's a little bit misleading because you can see here I've got activities and constraints. Now, Netskope, what we're going to come to is I can start blocking based upon activities and allowing only certain things to happen. But a typical secure web gateway is only going to allow you to block the traffic or allow the traffic. So I'm going to tick all of these. I will pretend that I only had the option there for visit, for example, to browse. I don't have these other options. We're going to come back to that. I've got options here of alerting, allowing, bypassing, etc. I'm just going to choose block. And we have this default template here, which I'm going to leave alone. This is what the user will see. So that message that appears when the user is going to try and go to a gambling site, that is what that template is referring to there. And I will just put in something so that we know what it is. And I'll just say gambling block. This is just the name. I mean, you really want to get your naming conventions right, where if this was for marketing, say somewhere in it that it's only applied to marketing. I like it to be the type of policy, then the nature of the policy, who it affects, etc., the activities, etc., that kind of stuff. I like it to be as detailed as possible when it comes to this, because you can end up having many policies. We can add descriptions, we can add email notifications and things. We're not going to do any of these. So just reading down from the top, if I wasn't talking so much, that would have taken me about 30 seconds to fill in. I've got my source, which is a user. We're not going to do the browser. I've got my category. The activities, bit of a misnomer, because in a secure web gateway, I can either allow or block, but in Netskope, we can go granular with activities, which we're going to come back to, and I'm blocking. I'm using the default template, and I've given it a name. I save that here. This is where the logic comes in over, you can weight your policies based upon how important they are to you. I tend to show this off as, if I am allowing, Netskope allows by default out of the box. So if I put in a rule for allowing gambling, there has to be a corresponding block one. If I put the block one first and it applies to everyone, then everyone will be blocked. So I want to put the exception first for maybe an individual user with the allow, and then the block next. I'm going to skip past this in future, but that's just to explain why it's asking here, like before policy, after policy, to the top, and so on. You can weight your policies, but for me, it's logically, You know, you want to be getting it in an order that's going to read it in the correct way to not impact users. So I save that. I need to apply my changes. And it's telling me here that it's syncing the policy. So bear in mind, I'm doing all of this in a cloud tenant. This is all web-based. And I've got this little client here. Now, the client itself, remember, isn't doing anything other than steering which traffic is to be sent to the tenant. And the policy that I just created isn't impacting the steering at all. So it's not going to touch my client. I'm not having to be updated right now. My client isn't getting told that this policy now exists. It all exists in the web. All my traffic is still going to go up to the cloud. It's just now going to be treated differently because this policy exists. So I will open up a new window so that I can keep this one open. It may take about 30 seconds for this. I'm hoping it'll be quick. There we go. So we've got a block now on Ladbrokes. We've got a block now on William Hill, and we're blocked even on the Google Translate. And that's because Netskope is context aware. It's not only just looking at the domain, it's looking at the traffic, the nature of the page. It's reading the page and seeing what content you're viewing. And it's working out that you're visiting a gambling site here, even though you're going to translate.google.com, but we're now blocked. But the issue that we've got here is this is the default out of the box policy, template. And it's just not that great. I mean, it's just telling me I'm not allowed to do this. It's blocked. Users are going to try and find a way around this. Okay, what you want to be doing is you want to be educating and informing your users whenever you're going to block them. You don't want them to try and find ways around the block, because that leads to them looking at proxies and trying to circumvent the rule. They get frustrated. I'm not allowed to do this. They think I'm skiving today when this is genuine. You know, they get annoyed and they'll try and find a way around it. You want to educate them. Here is the correct thing you should be doing. So let's pretend that we are a company and we have a client, and that client is William Hill. So therefore, we don't want to block William Hill. We want to allow William Hill, but we want to block every other website that involves gambling. So we come back to our policy. I'm going to click on web here on the left, and this is where we would look at what category. Now, we know William Hill is gambling, okay? But you would come in here and you do a URL lookup. It tells you here, I've just put williamhill.com in. It tells me that if William Hill is seen, it's going to be steered to Netskope, because I could granularly tell my tenant never to steer William Hill, but we're not doing that. We're sending all web traffic, but that's how granular you can get with the steering. If William Hill is visited, it is definitely going to Netskope. They're going to check it. It exists in the gambling category. Ignore this one. This is just for the demo. I'm going to recreate this, but I've got a gambling category. It exists in that, and it exists in this policy. You can see everything straight away. From if someone was to come to you and say this website's not working, you can come in here and quickly work out why, if Netskope was the thing that was impacting the website not working. If I come into URL list, this is where we start to build our exception. So I'm going to call it, we'll call it gambling, and I'll just call it allow to. We want to allow everything William Hill, so I'm putting a star at the start of that, and I'm saving, so it's star.williamhill.com, and I apply my changes. And I keep getting this little control panel for this webinar in the way of everything I'm doing. So if you see my mouse doing strange things, that's why. So I've got this URL list now existing, but I need to assign it to a category. So I can create a custom category. I can create my own category if I want to. I don't need to rely on Netskope to have a category. I will say though, they do have an option here on the URL lookup screen, where if I was to search for williamhill.com again, you get this button here, report miscategorization. If I click that and William Hill wasn't a gambling site, I just change these categories to what I think it is, add a little comment, and Netskope will review it and will change it if they agree. I've had responses back from that within about 40 minutes. They seem to be really, really good at doing that, where I used to have loads of custom categories created for uncategorized websites, etc. I've got rid of them all in our production tenant because they've been so good at dealing with these miscategorizations that I don't need my exceptions anymore, because all my policies work as intended because everything's been properly categorized. If I come to custom categories now, I will click on new custom categories. We'll call this one just the same, gambling allowed to. We want it to apply to all gambling sites. So I'm going to tell it this category is still all gambling sites. However, I want you to exclude my gambling allowed to URL list. So I've got an include section here and I've got an exclude. That's where, it's just the logic of it. It depends on what your policy is doing, which one you would apply it to. But for us, we want every gambling site to be blocked. So the policy that we've got, we want it to be for everyone and for every gambling site, but we want this one excluded, which was the William Hill. I save that and then I apply changes. And before we go back and change the actual policy, it's taking a moment. Before we go back and change the policy, remember that I said I didn't like the default template. I didn't like the notification that I saw. I don't want my users to try and get round the rule. I want them to know that William Hill is the only one that's allowed. So therefore, we want to better educate our users. So I'm just going to come down here on the left-hand side, and you can see I've got templates, user notification. I will just add a template. I'll keep this very quick. I'm not going to write War and Peace into here, but we'll call it gambling allowed to. We can add a company logo. So I've already got one uploaded. I can show the Somerford Associates logo if I want to. I can change the color of it, change all the text size, etc. And I'm just going to say stop. I'm going to say gambling sites are not allowed. You should be visiting williamhill.com. And then down here, I've got more options that I can customize. I can change what the button says to I agree, etc. If you want your users to confirm they've definitely read what the above says for legal reasons. This is for a block, but for a user alert, we can make it where all we're doing is warning them and telling them you shouldn't be doing this, but we're going to allow you anyway. Please click this button to confirm you've read this. And then eventually, that's a common way of rolling out a tool like this, because you don't want to impact your users negatively. So you would probably set up your policies with user alerts, maybe for a couple of weeks to a month, to let them know that eventually this site's going to be blocked. So it's not a surprise when it happens, so that your service desk isn't ringing off the hook with everyone saying, my website's blocked, because they've seen these user alerts previously. It's a good way to roll this out. But we have this option at the bottom too, where I've told them, use William Hill, but if I don't think they're going to go there, I can send them to it. So I'm going to say, if anyone gets this alert, send them to williamhill.com. Doesn't work all the time because it depends on the site you're on. Some sites don't let you leave. If you've ever been on a website, you can't hit the back button to get away from it with the way they coded the page. Some sites do that and trap you in it, that it won't actually let you out of it. But for the majority of sites I've seen in this, you will be redirected with this option enabled. So I'm now going to save that. And we now have this new gambling allowed to user template. I'll just apply my changes again. And then we return to our original policy. I will take off my existing category, choose my gambling allowed to. Now, because I've changed the category, I have to reconfirm what activities. So I will save these. And then I want to change my template as well. So it was gambling allowed to was for that. So just again, read down through the policy, we've got same user, the category is the new one, so all gambling is going to be blocked except William Hill, and we've got our new template as well. So I'm just going to save that and apply changes. And again, it's not instant. So while we're waiting on that loading, it will take about 30 seconds. I'm just going to very quickly layer in the next piece, which is secure web gateway, and that is threat protection. So I'm just going to very quickly make a threat protection policy here. Same principle. Sorry, that should be Netskope demo. Is that most secure web gateways, because all the traffic was going through the secure web gateway anyway, you may as well add threat protection to it too, to cut off threats at source. So rather than me visiting a website and downloading a virus and then having my on-device virus checker scan it, cut it off at source, the secure web gateway doesn't even let you download the file. It checks the file because the traffic's going through the secure web gateway anyway. And the minute that it hits any kind of flag for malware or threat, etc., then it will block it. So I'm just going to very quickly make a category-based one. We're just going to choose everything. So I'm just going to say for every single category that exists, I want you to check for threats. I will say upload and download, whether I'm uploading or downloading. We want to check for threats. I get different types of profiles I can create for threat detection where I could tell it to exclude certain files or ignore certain content. We're just going to use the default malware one, and we want to block everything. And I already have a template created. So there is a demo threat protection block one there. And we'll call this TP, meaning threat protection, and block. And I will save that. I will put this one to the top because it is to apply to everyone. Everyone is to be blocked if there's any kind of threats. And now if we look at these two policies sitting right next to each other, that's like typical secure web gateway. Everyone is to be affected by this one. We don't want any malware at all. And then we've got a custom category-based, exception-based policy for visiting websites and so on. And now if I open up my new window, we go to Ladbrokes, you can see I've got my new template. I'm not allowed to go to it. If I hit OK, I'm redirected to William Hill. If I try Google Translate, I'm not allowed to go. I also got this prompt in the bottom right. Depending on the nature of the website, you get an alert like this that is out with the page, or it will be embedded into the page. With this one, because it's embedded in such a way via Google Translate, it's done both. I say OK on that, and I'm probably going to get sent to William Hill inside of the actual Google Translate, which has happened. It sent me to William Hill inside of that page rather than taking me away from Google Translate. Now, if we want to show the threat protection side of it, there is a test malware that we can try and download from here. So this is iCar. They have my mouse is going crazy at the moment. I think my Mac is about to explode. So this is iCar. They've got anti-malware test files you can use for testing your antivirus and so on. I'm just going to do the exact same thing. I've just clicked to download that, and you can see it's been blocked at source by Netskope. So the principle is my traffic is going through that cloud tenant. It's not going through an on-premise device. I'm not having the file downloaded and then scanned. Netskope is stopping it at source. I'm not allowed to download this malware anymore. And that is a secure web gateway in a nutshell. Threat protection, category-based filtering, not good enough these days because of the way the internet is. You can no longer just block based upon domains. With the frequency of applications being created, I can download an application for most websites that I visit. If I log into, for example, Dropbox right now, I can download a native client to my machine that allows me to do everything Dropbox, but I'm not going through my browser anymore to do it. I'm using their application to do it. On your phone, I mean, I use Chrome on my phone, but I have Google Drive. I've got all sorts of little icons for even BBC News has got its own app that you can download to a phone. That's the application side of it, is you have all this, we'll say, freedom now of what can be done in a web browser, but you can also download native apps to your machine, and that's what we need to control. Blocking just based on a domain is not good enough. And you have to be able to block an activity as well, which we're now going to come to. If I come back to my tenant, I'm not going to change this and go through it again because we're going to do it like a proper like cloud app thing again instead of focusing on secure web gateway. But when I showed these activities here, we're not blocking based upon the domain. Yes, we are, because we created a URL list and so on, and we're treating it like a secure web gateway, but we're actually blocking every activity on the page. So if you imagine that I was blocked from visiting the site, I could be allowed to visit the site, but not log in. So you can see here I've got the option for login attempt. Netskope understands the language of the page. So when I showed the Google Translate earlier, it wasn't looking at the domain. Yes, it was to a certain extent, but it was looking at the content. It was looking at what I was trying to load. It understands the language of the internet. It doesn't have to just rely on a domain and a category to work out what to do with someone visiting a website or using an application. It can read the JSON file. If I was to click to log into a website, then I'm sending information via some kind of language to that page. It's going to be an API call. It's going to be a JSON. It's going to be a form post. Something like that is going to happen. Netskope can read that and can stop you from doing it. So if I wanted to, say, for example, a use case for this would be, we're not going to allow William Hill as a gambling site. However, we have a fraud team. We're a bank. And therefore, we're getting a number of calls in about people whose credit cards have been used on gambling sites. So we can't block the gambling sites from the fraud team because they have to go and they have to look at maybe the terms and conditions of that site. They have to get more information and do research of that gambling site. So if we block them, they can't do that. If we completely unblock them from it, they can potentially log in and start gambling, which we don't want them to do. We don't want to encourage gambling during work time, so we don't want them to log into it. So all we would do is, instead of blocking absolutely everything here, we block the things that are relevant. So the first thing jumping out at me is, do our users and the fraud team need to log into the website? No. There might be a case for it if they wanted to test something or prove something, but no. So therefore, we would only block logging in. Do they need to download anything? Maybe. So it might be that it's a PDF file that they have to download for the terms and conditions, that it's not embedded in a web page, that you have to download them. So yeah, we want to allow them to download. We want to allow them to browse. They have to be able to visit the site. But have they any reason to ever upload to it? No. So we block the upload. So we're allowing them to browse, we're allowing them to download, but we're not allowing them to log in, and we're not allowing them to upload. And we save that instead. And apply changes. And we'll give that like 30 seconds. So that's the principle of the activity-based granular. When we're talking about the cloud application service broker, security broker, that is the activity side of it. It's where you're granular, you're getting more control of the applications and what people can do. And the use cases for it, if you think of it as, in fact, we may as well just go through this with Google Drive in just a moment. We'll actually show it in real time. I thought this was going to take longer, because I do talk, but we've got plenty of time. So we'll go through this with Google Drive. And I will just very quickly, in fact, sorry, new window. And let's try our Ladbrokes now. Are we still able to visit it? We can visit it now. I don't have a login for Ladbrokes to prove that I can't log into it, so I can't attempt it, but I can browse this. I could go to the terms and conditions on it, but I can't log into it. I can't do it. It's activity-based now instead of just domain category-based. I'm controlled via activity. Now, where that's important with cloud applications, we're going to do this with Google Drive. I will also take a look at how the domains are a problem too. So I've got Google Drive right here, but I have all these other cloud applications. For the benefit of this call, let's pretend that we're a Google house. We 100% use Google. We've got Gmail, we've got Google Drive for storing all our files. We only ever use Google Drive. We get a user comes along, has got a very important document. So let's just go to it. Let's go to it. I might already have the file in there. If not, I'll upload it. So again, I don't have, because I'm using a demo account, it's a cloud-facing portal. You always want to have your MFA on there. Because this is a demo account, I don't have the MFA, but it is integrated with Okta. So I'm just going to quickly pop in my credentials if I can remember them for this. And I can. So I log into my Google account, and I've got a very important situation arising. My CEO is meant to stay at a particular hotel, is meant to stay at a particular Hilton, right? And there's some kind of mess up with the booking. And I've got proof of the booking here, this Hilton document. And I want to give that to someone at the hotel. So I want to give this file to them. However, there are risks involved with using cloud storage. I can come in here and I can do share, and this will generate a link for me. So I can put in here the details of someone that I have to share the file with, and then they'll get a link and they can actually come in and log into it. Now, people have issues with that. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it wants them to use a Google account in order to log in. There's various reasons why that might not work for an individual. Or I can open up this link completely publicly and only give that person the link, but that link could end up in the wild. So they don't need to authenticate or do anything at all and be checked by Google. It's just a public link that's sitting hidden, but it could get out there, and therefore anyone can download it. So we put an application control in to stop that happening. So going back to the activity side of it, if I come to my tenant again, and we start looking at Google Drive from an application point of view, let me just get my user, not that one, I want that one, get rid of that, and get rid of that. So I've got my user, and my app this time is going to be Google Drive. And we take the same logic, we want to block, okay, so we want to block Google Drive for our users doing certain things in Google Drive. So what are our options? Create, delete, download. They're going to have to use all of that for their job. We've got edit, they need to use that for their job. Form share, probably internal as well. Move, post, etc. Oh, we don't want to share. We don't want to allow them to share that link with the external world. But it's such a huge part of Google Drive to be able to do that. You've chosen Google Drive as your product. So therefore, you don't want to block this for everyone. Now, we can set certain constraints here. Again, going granular and understanding the JSON API call aspect. If I was to share it with a certain individual, then I could put in a constraint to say, if it's been shared with these types of people, like this domain, for example, in their email, then don't allow it, or only allow it if they use a particular email address, etc. We can go granular at that. But in order for us to get the benefit of Google Drive, we really don't want to be blocking the use of the app. So what do? We have to come up with a way that suits our convenience and our security and so on, but still accepting the fact we're using a cloud application now. And the other side of that is if we started completely blocking everything from Google Drive from happening, like say, for example, this user, I send them the file, right? So I send them a link to the file, and it turns out they can't download it. I try and email it to them, and for some reason the email doesn't work either. Maybe it's blocked at their end, maybe it's blocked at our end by an email filter. There's a DLP tool in the way. Netskope is a DLP tool. We're not going to go into that in great detail at the moment, but it gets blocked. So therefore, what's the user going to do? All they're going to do is find a way around it. It's urgent. They need it now. I know what I'll do. I've got a Box account. I'm going to log into Box with my personal details. I've got a Box account. I'll upload it to Box, and I'll delete it once we're finished. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to put it into Box. Yeah. So I take it and I put it into Box and I upload it, and there it is. I upload the Hilton document to here. That is now completely off the reservation. So we've stopped. We've not stopped the user using Google Drive. There's been an issue, and this is now out in the wild. So under GDPR, part of the rules are you need to be accountable for all the data, all your customers' personal data. You need to do subject access requests, have inventories. You need to delete them within certain timescales, etc. All the rules that go with GDPR, we've now breached because our company have no idea that this file exists here. We're in complete control of it. We've uploaded this document full of personal information to a personal website, and therefore we've created a whole stink, but the company don't even know that we did it. They had no idea that we actually uploaded that file to here. And then it's out in the wild again. I could create a public link from here, the same as I could in Google Drive, and then therefore we don't even know who's got that link anymore. And I forget to delete it, so therefore the Hilton document always remains inside the Box. The other flip side to it is I logged into it with my personal details. So it's a personal account that I'm using, and I've now got company information in it. I could have also signed up for the website using my work details, which means that I would probably use the same password as I do for my work email because it's easy and convenient for me. So what if Box gets breached? Who's got my username and password for work now? Because I used the same details. So going back to that cloud-facing portals, if I don't have my MFA in the front of my maybe Office 365 account or Google account even, then someone's got my username and password because I used a complete third-party site. And there is another side to it, which is there's legal ramifications of what happens to your data in these websites as to who owns them once you upload them. So when you get these 3 websites like WeTransfer generates its revenue from collecting emails, and also it's a huge advert when you visit it. So that's how they make their money. But some of these websites make your money by actually having the data that you've sent to them. They control it, they own it, they can sell it if they want to. You sign up with the terms and conditions. and you agree to it and you upload the file, most people don't read them and will just hit the upload button. But the user now owns that file. They can do what they want with it. They're not liable for it in the same way you were, because you've agreed that they are guilt-free if anything happens to it, and they can do what they want with it, which is a big concern. And people don't think of that when they start using these things. So going back to the relevance of this is, from a cloud application point of view, we don't want to lose our features inside the Google Drive. That's what we use. We pay for it. We want our users to be using the correct way of using it, but we don't want them using these backdoors. And that's where our application-based controls come in. If we come back to the tenant, instead of putting Google Drive in here and applying the policy to Google Drive, we will now apply it to Box. And we're going to say that, what do we not want our users doing in Box now? Now, if we block Box, what if one of our clients uses Box and sends us files from Box and we stop our users using them? We've created the same situation as we had before, where the person couldn't get the hotel form for some reason, and then people just start finding ways around that because it's inconvenient, etc. So we don't want to block Box completely in the secure web gateway sense, but we'll stop people logging in, because you don't need to log in if it's a public link that's been shared with you from Box. So we're going to stop them. And here under our constraint, I've created 2 constraints previously. You can see that I can set a rule to say, if the email matches the work domain, take action, don't allow it. Or if it does not match the work domain, take action, don't allow it, if we were creating a block policy. So now we're stopping people using their personal accounts. Now we're stopping people signing up for things. If we chose form post under DLP, we can stop people signing up for these things with their company credentials, and stopping that credential creep right out there in the wild, because we're blocking them from not only signing up for the application, we're blocking them from logging into it ever again. We're stopping them from doing anything in that application. We could block it completely, or we could just stop them logging into it. Or we could say, okay, you're allowed to log into it, but we will never ever allow you to upload to it. And again, you get these constraints here. We could say that if it's a certain file, blah, 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 blah. I would tend to just block that completely and say, right, you're never using Box again to upload a file to. You can log into it to download stuff if a client is working with you in Box for some reason as part of a project or whatever. We will allow that, but we're never going to allow you to upload a file. And that's the application side of it. And because it's application driven, it doesn't matter if it's in their website. It doesn't matter if it's the icon that they're clicking on and they're not using the browser. It's going to catch it. It can identify the app, and it can take the appropriate action depending on what policy we create. And it is so granular when it comes to this for each of these applications, because they do all the research. They work all this out for you. And that brings us to the last thing that we'll take a look at, which is, the Cloud Confidence Index. So this is where Netskope have done the research. They have 41,393 applications that they have started research on. If I was to click on under research here, there's 8,837 of them are still under research. They're still working out the details on them. They haven't got a final say on 8,000 applications. But for the rest of them, there's 41,000 minus 8,000. So you're talking about 33,000 odd applications in here that they've went and done all this due diligence on. If I go to Google Drive, previously when we looked at the secure web gateway aspect, and we looked at the domain-based exception policy, we used a very simple example, which was williamhill.com and gambling. In here, these are all of the domains that you would have to work with if you wanted to properly create a policy for Google Drive. So all of these, so I mean, they're split down. We'll use desktop, right? So from a desktop browser, that's all the domains that you would need. If you were using a secure web gateway and you were trying to work out how you could unblock something for your users, it would usually start with, okay, what's the website? Okay, it's drive.google.com. So you would create a policy that excludes drive.google.com. The user goes to log into it, still gets blocked, because you're now hitting one of these other domains behind the scenes. And therefore, when you're hitting those domains behind the scenes, the policy's been triggered, because it's still like a cloud storage application, for example, and you've created a category-based cloud storage block, but you accepted drive.google.com. Well, it's going to hit one of these other ones, that googleappies.com, for example, and your block's going to happen again. Or the user won't be able to log in, or they won't be able to upload, or they won't be able to download. They'll keep hitting issue after issue every time they hit one of these domains. And that's the level of research that Netskope are doing here. They're working out that is every domain that you need for Google Drive to work. So when I go back to my policy and I choose Google Drive as an application, all of this is already factored in. You're not having to do the research, you're not having to go out there and work it out and so on. And they work out all the activities as well that Netskope can understand when a user interacts with that site. So here's the activities here. For web traffic, we still got activities when it came to the gambling sites and so on, because it can understand like basic web traffic, it can read like HTML, it can read those types of calls and so on. But for the applications themselves, they might use like custom language, etc. They do that research and they get you that level of activity, granularity on the policies that you create. They also go down into the detail of the legal aspect. And this is where I was talking about the who owns the data. When you upload to it, they get answers to those questions. They will tell you here. They also break it down by cost too, where if you had to do a comparison, say you had a marketing team that were using Box already, and then you had a marketing team that were using Dropbox already, well, you can do a comparison here. So if I put in Box, and then I put in Dropbox, I've got a compare button. And we can look very quickly at the differences between these applications. Now they have these scores at the top here. Those scores are dependent on risk factors. They've got a weighting thing behind the scenes that they use to work out who gets a good score, who doesn't. But it's also based on the interaction by the application owner themselves. They're not doing all this on their own. They're reaching out to these companies and they're asking them, tell us about this, how do you do that, etc. And if the company won't deal with them, won't answer the questions, they get a low score, because they haven't been able to get the full information about that company from the horse's mouth. But with companies like Google and Box and so on, they're happy to do these things. They want their products used, so they're not going to stand in the way. But as we go down through here, you begin to see the differences get called out. Anything that's similar won't look different, but anything with a box around it, you can quickly compare. The main one I'd be looking at here is the price. You know, what is the price of using these? There's no price for Google Drive. It's free. You do pay for Google accounts if you're using an enterprise level thing, so it's probably you're going to have to look at Google as an app instead of Google Drive. But you can quickly see here that what do I get from Dropbox? Like, what do I get from Box? Like, is it worth it for $25 here? Their advanced is 20. Do we need to go higher than that, etc.? But you can also see it's breaking down my users as well. Who's already using it? So if it was only 2 people in the marketing team were showing up here for Dropbox and it was like 100 people for Box, then, you know, Box might be better. It might be easier because it's going to take a lift and shift of everything from Box to Dropbox. You can see who's using the applications. If I come back to the main screen and we do that search for Google Drive again, and just going back to the user side of it, you can see that information here in more detail. And you can go in and you can start looking at the evidence of these things, because the other side of it too is, remember I said at the start of the call, a secure web gateway is essentially a firewall based upon web categories and domains. So all you're really going to see in the logs of a secure web gateway are source, probably the user or the machine they're coming from, or a combination of the two. Destination is going to be the website that they tried to access, and then some kind of policy, name, and the action it was taken, like block. That's all you're going to see from it. It's just a couple of columns. They might go into more detail. They might be able to pull more information from it, but it's mainly going to be block allow, source destination. We can see that everything that I've been doing during this call today is all getting logged at an activity level. You can see that I'm uploading, downloading, browsing, trying to log into things. You're not going to see that in a secure web gateway. But when you can get to the cloud application or activity layer, the visibility the Netskope's got, you can now actually see what users are up to. You can now see how they're interacting with these applications. You can see what they're doing. So and you can create policies based around those types of things and start to get ahead of what your users are up to. So if they also have a thing, actually, I'll call it out very quickly, is under my incidents here, when I talked about compromised credentials earlier, where a user is logging into a site and they're using like company details and so on, Netskope's checking that. So they're actually looking at leaks that happen online, and they're seeing things like it's not an exact match. Okay, it's looking at about 8% of this email address here, but they're checking like leaks that happen online, and they call them out to you and say, this user's credentials might have been leaked. They might have been used on this particular website, and that website was hacked last year, so you might want to look at that. But then they'll call out other strange things, like if I suddenly started uploading 100 gig worth of information to a personal Dropbox account, you might want to know about it. Netskope will tell you. They'll actually call it out because they're seeing such granular activity and behavior and traffic and so on. And it's all because this little client is just steering my traffic up to a cloud tenant, and then it's being inspected and being impacted by any policies that I create. It doesn't matter where I am in the world, as long as I've got an internet connection and I can reach one of their tenants, then that traffic's going to be inspected. And that brings us to the end. I'll just actually quickly just go back to summarize on that for the application side of things. So real-time protection, remember, we're checking things in real time. If I want to base, say for the Dropbox thing, I could block all cloud storage as a category, such as I would do inside of my secure web gateway. So cloud storage, I've now blocked everything. Google Drive, Box, Dropbox, everything is now blocked if I was to save this policy against the user. If you came along to me and said, well, we need to use Google Drive, what do I need to do? I now need to go and find out every single domain that Google Drive uses and create a URL list exception for it. Or, because this is application centric, I could just create an exception for Google Drive, and all of that's done for me. Sorry, I'm in Cloud App. So all of that is done for me because they've done all the research, they've worked out everything about Google Drive that I need to know, and I would just set an allow policy for Google Drive before my cloud storage block policy, and now any users with this policy can use Google Drive. And if I want to, I can drill right down into it, activity-based, to say, yes, you're allowed to use Google Drive, but you're not allowed to download from Google Drive. Not allowed to download it. And just to round that off, I mentioned DLP. You can layer DLP onto any of these policies. So say, for example, I was uploading to Dropbox. Well, I'm going to let you upload to Dropbox. That's fine, upload to Dropbox. But we're going to create a DLP policy, and we're going to say, if we detect any GDPR information in what you're uploading to Dropbox, we'll block it. That's where the DLP aspect comes in. That's when you start layering on the features of Netskope, it becomes extremely powerful. But today we're only talking about secure web gateway and cloud access. That is it in a nutshell, how it works and the logic behind it. So I hope that was helpful for you. I usually have an end slide for this, but I don't. So if you need any more information at all, then please come to us at info@somerfordassociates.com. If you get any questions about today, need any further assistance, then please reach out to us. And if you want to join me in any future webinars, then keep an eye out as well, because I do these quite often. And it was a pleasure having you on the call today. Thank you very much. And I'm going to end the webinar now. Thank you.